Hi, I'm Molly from horticulture.co.uk, and today I'm joined with David Keegan, founder of DK Garden Design. David, do you want to explain a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Hi, Molly. Yes, I'm a garden and landscape designer based in Manchester, but I cover most of the northwest of the UK and sometimes take on international projects as well. I've been designing gardens for a little over 20 years now.
Great. So, can you explain a little bit about what first drew you to a career in garden design?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I never actually initially, I never made a conscious decision actually to become a garden designer. I had actually moved to Manchester to study furniture restoration, of all things. My previous career, I was actually a professional photographer, so I had quite a strong visual sense anyway. While I was in Manchester studying, I created a garden and people started asking about, wanting to come in and see the garden. And from there, they asked me to design gardens from there for them. And it really was it was an organic process that was building up. And then I used to subscribe to Gardener's World, and there was an ad in Gardener's World for a TV program that was coming up. So I thought, well, okay, I might as well give it a bash, make an application. And that was probably the life-changing decision that I made, which was garden school and actually it's hard to believe it's almost, 18 years now, 2005. There were 2,500 applicants for it. And the final round was an interview, a live kind of interview, a screen in Kew Gardens. Um, and I made it through.
How did your appearance in that program change and influence your career?
I think at the time I wasn't really aware of the impact that it would have. And I think one of the things about being on TV, that had a viewership of 2.5 million people. But when you're actually part of that process, I don't think you're really very aware of that, and the impact that it has on people. So when the program started to air, I found myself on trains with people kind of staring at me. I'm thinking, why is that person staring at me? And then you think, oh yeah, you're on TV. So that's the strange side of it. The brilliant side of it was the opportunity to spend 6 months with the RHS in Wisley, which, we were exposed to some of the best and most creative minds in gardening, as well as garden design. There was also an opportunity to travel abroad and see some of the kind of fantastic, particularly Italianate gardens in Italy. But the other thing then after, following on from that, is the credibility it gives you and
Mm.
the confidence. Because you've actually made it through that process and you've been successful, it gives you the confidence to believe that you actually have the ability to become a designer or to actually pursue it as a career.
I mean, you talk about like the elaborate nature of designing, but your motto is it's all about the plants. Can you elaborate on the meaning of this?
I think the idea of it being all about the plants is that my sources of inspiration are very much kind of rooted in travel and in landscape, natural landscape. And therefore, I think it's more a case of being exposed to what is it that inspires you? What is it that drives you to kind of want to design gardens, and then how are you going to approach designing that garden? I think my responses are definitely very heavily influenced by my exposure to natural landscape, to forests, to woodland. So that's where the idea of it's all about the plants comes from.
Great. And then working that into your kind of process, how do you approach designing a garden or landscape for a client?
My design process is actually quite detailed. The first thing I do with every project is arrange a site visit to have a consultation with potential clients and look at what's there and then talk through the possibilities and talk through what the kind of options might be. Once I'm commissioned, it's a very detailed process. It's a three-part design process. The first thing I do with every project is create an electronic mood book. And we have a consultation with the client with that, where we talk through and actually that's really about trying to gain a greater insight into what they like and what they're going to respond to and putting ideas in front of them. so that it can inform my approach to designing the space. From that, we go to concept designs, and we use very, very strong kind of visual imagery. We have videos of what the design garden would potentially look like. And that's really, really helpful, because you'll find that most people that are commissioning a garden designer are doing so because they really can't get a sense of how they want that space to look. Or they find it very difficult to transform that into reality. So that really helps that process. And from there, we go to final designs, which obviously would be the full landscape plans, planting plans, and elevations of any kind of built detail within that project.
I guess with all that work, you might face some challenges in your job. Can you explain a time where maybe you faced a challenge while working on a project and how it then turned out?
I think one of the biggest challenge actually was COVID, because I had started work on a design of a very large project in Cheshire East. And that was a multi-layered project. There were 5 different gardens in it, including a new orchard and meadow. And we had a schedule for the installation of the garden, and particularly for the planting. So we had probably about 30 or 40,000 pounds worth of plants that were delivered, and then we went into lockdown. And the build of that garden coincided with the kind of renovation of the house, which involved there were parts of the house, that were being completely rebuilt. So it was impossible to actually build the garden and install the planting until the rest of the build had been finished. So it went from a large team on the build on that project right down to virtually 1 or 2 people, and then obviously we had social distancing. So the real challenge there was actually keeping all of those plants in good condition and alive. And
Yeah.
we hit a 3-month stretch of non-stop sunshine. You couldn't make it up if you wanted to. Which under normal circumstances would be absolutely wonderful, but on that particular year meant that the plants required a lot more attention, given that they were still in root balls and they were in pots. We'd healed quite a few into part of a field. So it ended up with kind of all hands on deck with regards to watering. So when the clients wanted to go away, I would go over and I would take care of the watering. The landscapers would go over on other occasions. But the clients were absolutely wonderful. They literally spent hours and hours watering and taking care of all these plants. With the result that at the end, we actually lost very, very few plants when it came around to planting. So I think that's probably a most recent kind of challenging memory.
Do you have a particular favorite project that you've worked on?
I guess the honest answer to that would be the one that I'm working on at the moment. There was a tropical oasis garden that we finished the install on about a month ago. And that will most likely be a favorite and remain so, because it's very, very kind of plant heavy. And it uses a lot of a planting palette that I mightn't normally use. It has a microclimate, so it can be a little bit more adventurous. It also allowed me the opportunity to use some more kind of exotic plants from that we sourced from Crook Farm in Carnarvon. Apart from that, we're working on a sensory garden for Rochdale Council in Hollingsworth Lake. And that's definitely going to be a long-term favorite, because it's a very, very different approach, because it's a public space, but also because it's a sensory garden. Again, the approach to the planting palette and the plant combinations was very different for that. So I'm really looking forward to watching that establish over the next number of years, and also watching how people actually react to it.
There are viewers that are kind of looking to spruce up their garden, maybe on a budget. Do you have any top tips for them?
Again, there's a conversation that I have every time I go and see a potential new client. Obviously, one of the things that they want from you at that initial meeting is they want to get an idea of how much it's likely to cost. And one of the repeat experiences, and the same thing that people actually have no concept of how much it costs to, to design and build a garden. So there's often an element of shock when you give them an estimate of how much you think, because they'll generally tell you what they want, what their brief is. And based on that brief, given my experience, I can usually give them a fairly decent idea of how much I think they need to spend. And then they step back in horror, and it's like, well, I'm not going to spend that. At that point, my advice is always spend your money once. And what I mean by that is that I've seen it a number of times over the years where you have that meeting, you tell somebody, this is how much I think you need to spend. They think, well, I'm not going to spend that. So they spend an amount of money, but they never get what they actually originally wanted. So they end up spending the money and then not being happy. So I think if you're going to do a garden on a budget, rather than approaching it on the basis of this is how much I have to spend now, is write out a list of what you actually want from that space, how you want to use it, what you want in that space. And if you can't afford to do it all in one go, it's better to do it in phases. So do it in actual stages as and when you can afford it, rather than doing something which doesn't quite match up to what what your kind of expectations were and what you hope to achieve in the first place.
So, obviously, we're coming up to the colder months of the year. What are some of the gardening jobs that you reckon that gardeners should be undertaking at this time of year?
Well, this is obviously the still a perfect time for bulb planting. So I would suggest that that would definitely be top of the list now before we get too far, before we get into November. So bulb planting would be a big thing. And then also planning for whatever tender plants you have. For example, the tree ferns I mentioned earlier will require, they'll require a bit of winter cover.
Do you have any upcoming projects that you're looking forward to and would like to share?
One of my favorite types of projects to be asked to be involved in, or, to look at potentially being given a commission for, are slopes. I don't know why, but I have this thing. If there is a slope in a garden, that's it, I'm in. So I received an inquiry about 4 months ago from a couple who were considering buying a house on the basis of the garden. I won't tell you the full name of the property, just, from a privacy point of view, but I can tell you that the second part of the name of the property was Cliffs. And in their initial email, they said there's a reason why it's called Cliffs. It literally sloped down to, huge, a very, very big plot. So they booked me to do a consultation on the basis that if I thought we could do something with this plot, they would buy the house. I've never been asked. I've never been asked to help people to make a decision on buying a house before. So I went out and looked at the project and talked it through with them. It has views that actually go down onto a lake, very famous lake in the northwest of the UK in Marple Bridge. And so I talked through the potential of it and told them what we could actually do with that space. And on the basis of that, they bought the house. So we're just waiting for the surveys to complete, and then I will start work on the designs on that. I think that the main thing is I'm always, I want new challenges, whether that be climatic or it be the planting palette or indeed the topography of the site that's involved.
We actually do get a lot of questions about planting on a slope. Do you have any tips for planting on a slope or kind of a slanted garden?
That's actually a very difficult question to answer. Because it depends on the, I think it really depends on the soil structure to begin with. And also it depends on what they're going to do. Are they going to terrace it, or are they actually going to work with a slope? So the one that I've been talking about, it's going to be a combination of two things. At the very end of the site, actually, I'm probably going to install a wildflower meadow on the slope, and also create a new orchard, a small orchard garden on that actual slope. I think what you need to be looking at, again, depending on the severity of the slope, you most likely want to be looking at plants where they've got a very decent root structure that will help to bind the soil, which will give it some stability. I've worked on a number of them over the years, and the challenges have been very, very different in each one. And as a result, the approach that you take is very much dictated by the specifics of that site.
How do you see the future of landscape and garden design kind of evolving in the next few years?
I think it's going to be very challenging for the reasons that we were talking about earlier, which is that there's no kind of predictability anymore. The all of the things that we're being told are literally going out the window year on year. It's changing. The other side of that, though, is that there's a real skills shortage in landscaping. In the actual the physical part of building gardens, and I think that really comes down to media. Um, I think far too much of the media is a little bit too kind of, the programs, for example, that were kind of shown on TV are a little bit too old fashioned. I think we need more exposure, more media exposure on programs that look at the process of designing and building gardens. What goes into building, and how are we going to build those gardens of the future? In to try and kind of to work with the climatic changes that we're going to face. I'd like to see more focus on that. And I think we're still stuck in a traditional approach. We haven't really, the public face of landscaping and gardening hasn't really caught up with the reality on the ground, which is a very different, it's a very different kind of world. And I don't think they don't seem to represent each other at the moment.
With all of that in mind, what advice would you give to budding garden and landscape designers?
Go and visit as many gardens as possible. The big National Trust, for example, the RHS gardens. I think the RHS gardens are a wonderful place to actually immerse yourself. Particularly for me, I think one of my favorites would be Wisley, where again, I spent 6 months living in Wisley. It's a wonderful garden because it has so many different styles of garden in it. So you're actually immersed in different planting combinations and different kind of planting styles. But then you have a lot of the National Trust gardens, and then go out into the natural landscape. So that's from an inspirational point of view. And then I would suggest anybody who wants to become a garden designer, go out and get a job with a landscaping firm. I actually started out building my own gardens. So I used to design them and actually build them from scratch. And I think that's a really powerful experience. I just design gardens, and I have landscaping firms that install my projects for me. But I started out by building gardens. So I would say get a job with a landscaping firm and learn the basics. Start with building gardens, and then obviously with planting gardens, and then maybe go and do a course in garden design or do an RHS course. You can't learn the practicalities of design, sitting at a computer. You'll only learn them by actually taking part in that process.
Thank you so much, David. Is there anywhere our viewers can find you?
Yes, absolutely. You can find me on Instagram. It's at DK Gardens, or you can find me on my website, which if you go into Google and put David Keegan Garden Design, you'll very quickly find a link to my website, or you can find me on my YouTube channel.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.